the Syria crisis and the crisis of legitimacy across the Arab Spring world, across the post-Ottoman world, how this crisis is serving to bring us together. First, let's just take classic diplomacy. The conferences, the meetings among diplomats, prime ministers, foreign ministers of Turkey, President of Turkey, and high officials here, from the White House to the Secretary of State and other cabinet officers. Not only have we met frequently throughout these past several years, through my tenure, and since I left office only 4 months ago, that pattern of high-level consultation and contact continues, and indeed has escalated. The White House just announced a couple of weeks ago that the Vice President will be visiting Turkey next week, in fact. And these are serious consultations. But on Syria in particular, Syria, and for that matter Iraq, and confronting Daesh or ISIL or the Islamic State, Turkey has been a leader in convening the opposition to the Assad regime from the beginning of the Arab Spring. From May of 2011 was when Turkey first started allowing the Syrian opposition to meet quite openly inside Turkey in safety and security, and where United States diplomats were first able to contact these people and discuss with them what their plans were, and to work with them to try to create something new and different in Syria, in a post-Assad Syria. And throughout this period, whether it's convening the international friends of Turkey, that is to say other countries, up to 100 and something or 80 something at one count, and then a core group that led to 2 conferences in Geneva seeking a political settlement, it was Turkey that was in the middle of that. Do we have differences of perspective? Yes, we certainly do. Should we work with this group or that group, arms, no arms? All those things are out there for discussion, and a lot of the disagreements are very clear, so I'm not trying to paper over disagreements or suggest that they're not there. They are. But the fact is that Turkey and the United States need each other to address the conflicts in the region, know it quite openly, acknowledge it, and continue the high-level consultation, not only bilaterally, but as the dyad that brings together other countries in Istanbul, in New York, in Geneva, in Paris, elsewhere, to try to work on this problem. That's just a classic diplomacy. Military to military. When I returned to Turkey this time in 2011, I found that because of internal controversies and challenges and redefinition in the role of the Turkish military in the Turkish state, the military had withdrawn from not only politics but governance in a way that really surprised me from what I had known in the 1990s when Marie and I were there with Mark and Mildred. It was really quite striking. And while the relationship, the friendship, the military-to-military conversation continued, it was always friendly, it was less rich, it was less operational, and it was less close, less frequent. We were used to having general officers on both sides visiting both directions all the time, monthly at the very least before. That pace had slowed down, the quality of time together was diminished, and we didn't see it. That has picked up under the pressure of events. By late 2011, we were able to establish at our embassy a new position for special operations officers to work with Turkish counterparts. I will not reveal anything that is classified, of course, but that is something that's not publicly advertised. A whole new discipline of military cooperation was begun and established, where Turkish special operations officers and American special operations officers trained together and began comparing notes and having contacts with each other. That's hugely valuable. We had more and more contacts at all ranks to deal with what was going on and to do planning. We won't call it contingency planning, that has a special meaning in NATO, it gets people all kinds of worried, but prudent planning, let us call it that. And that deepened and became extremely meaningful long before anybody heard of the name of the Islamic State. Let me assure you that that is going on. I've had the privilege of knowing John Allen for many, many years, and including several discussions in his new capacity. The military-to-military conversation is going on. John now is, of course, in a diplomatic role. Intelligence, there's not much that can be said in an open session like this, but if you ask any Turkish or American intelligence officers, you have the clearances, you will know that there's great satisfaction, along with frustrations, along with high expectations of each other, but there has been extremely meaningful, important, productive cooperation between Turkish and American intelligence services. I think I can safely say that without revealing anything. Let me just affirm that to you. Law enforcement has always been a feature of Turkish-American relations when I served in Turkey in the past, but it was principally focused on the Drug Enforcement Agency, which has had a presence there. If you think back to the horrible period of Midnight Express, counter-narcotics cooperation has been what Turks and Americans thought about when we thought about law enforcement cooperation. We didn't even have in the United States anything like a Ministry of Interior until after 9/11, and we set up our Department of Homeland Security. There was no real counterpart to the Turkish interior law enforcement security apparatus. We have developed the law enforcement cooperation greatly. In the 90s, we had an FBI attaché there. Now we have not only the FBI, not only the Drug Enforcement Agency. During my tenure, we brought in a Department of Homeland Security specialist whose deep area of expertise is border security. So at a time when people talk about transits of foreign fighters in Turkey, yes, that's an issue. That's a very important one. But the Turks didn't deny it and didn't shy away from cooperation. We escalated our cooperation. We inaugurated that position of a Homeland Security officer as part of the permanent party of the U.S. Embassy in Accra with the visit of then Secretary of Homeland Security, Janet Napolitano, in the autumn of 2012, long before anybody heard of the so-called Islamic State. We did that in recognition that there were big gaps in what we needed to do together in terms of sharing not only of intelligence, but evidence, law enforcement cooperation, leading not only to extraditions and prosecutions on both sides, but to actually strengthening of capacities and building up of authorities of the state and capacities of the state. So, classic diplomacy, military to military, intelligence, law enforcement. And then finally I come to humanitarian relief as well. Turkey famously has stepped up and upped its capacity in terms of taking care of foreign refugees. Turkey has passed legislation to deal with refugees that previously were unacknowledged. It has established a whole department of the Interior Ministry to deal with refugees. The state collaborates with foreign non-governmental organizations in providing refugee relief. These are all things that were unheard of in the past. I'm not painting a rosy scenario. I'm not suggesting there are no problems. But we do have to get behind the headlines that would have many Turks and Americans believe that somehow we're at odds with each other. Somehow Turkey has one purpose and we have another purpose, and all we're doing is advertising our disagreements. The disagreements are obvious. The areas of collaboration are less obvious, but are extremely important and very durable. The final area of collaboration I wanted to discuss is, again, you. Let me bring it back to you, us, here tonight. And that's the people-to-people part. That Ambassador Kilic was able to come and say this evening was, as I say, a sign of the importance the government of Turkey attaches to people-to-people collaboration. Groups like the American Friends of Turkey fill a really important niche. Anything that brings Turks and Americans together is what we need to sustain us through these times of noisiness in the relationship. Turkey, by any measure, remains as westward-facing as Ataturk intended it to be. Turkey is the largest European sender of students of higher education to the United States. The largest, period. It is the 10th largest sender of students of higher education to the United States in the world, with about 12,000 a year. And that has been year after year for many years since we recovered after 9/11. Most of that funding is not American Fulbright funding. The Fulbright program is a trivial source of funding for the Turkish students who come here. It's mostly about 5,000 of those get one form or another of Turkish government support, telling you about Turkish policy. They are not sending their students in numbers to Iran or to Al-Azhar or other great Islamic centers of learning. They're sending them to the United States, and many to Europe as well, thanks to European Union funding. But Turkish government funding and Turkish parents are sending their kids here with the encouragement of the government of Turkey. So the people-to-people piece is also strong and growing. It has been because of dedication of groups like yours, and I should say ours. Thank you for welcoming me to your board, the American Friends of Turkey board.
Board members.
And for that sustained commitment. Thank you all for that commitment. Thank you all for coming this evening and welcoming me.
I think we have a few minutes left for questions from the floor. I urge you to keep your questions precise. Do not offer a lecture. We'll reserve that for another time. But any questions from the floor? I think there are microphones around somewhere, and perhaps they are coming. But in the meantime, raise your voice. Any questions from the floor? Sir.
I was wondering.
Loudly, please.
What is the level of concern of the United States about the tense relations between Israel and Turkey, given the fact that the two used to be close allies?
Who would like to respond? Would you like to respond?
I will let the newest member of the retired ambassador answer that question.
Please remember, I do not speak for the United States government anymore. I speak for myself. I'm no longer in the State Department. I can tell you what is very clear on the public record. President Obama personally pitched in and got involved, led American diplomacy to try to rectify, help normalize the relations between Turkey and the United States. And after, in March of 2013, when he went to Tel Aviv and spoke with Netanyahu, worked extremely hard and arranged for, in talking with the Turks and with the Israelis, for the Israelis to say the appropriate words in public. That led to the Turks then saying the appropriate magic words that dealt with each side's domestic sensitivities about the terrible tragedy of the Mavi Marmara ship flotilla that was off of Gaza in May of 2010. That went a long way toward repairing the relationship, but it's still not all the way there. There's still words that have to be spoken on both sides. There is still the question of compensation to the families of the victims that Turkish and Israeli diplomats have been working on very intensively and hard when I was in office, right up until this past summer. Crises like the emergence of the Islamic State have a way of focusing people's minds and attention and having people reassess what their immediate and long-term interests are. Having been out of office, I cannot say what impact that has had on Turkish and Israeli thinking about each other. For sure, all I can refer to now is my contacts with people on all sides. I know from my contacts among very thoughtful Turkish officials and non-officials and very thoughtful Israelis that people in the government on both sides continue to see the importance of getting that relationship normalized again. That isn't to say they'll be all warm and fuzzy, but that the two countries need to be able to have a routine, daily, official conversation at the level of ambassadors, which is to say ministers of government. There are still sensitivities that need to be addressed. They're both democracies. I'm not confident it will happen anytime soon. I don't pretend that, but I am confident that people on both sides in both governments would like it to happen and are still working on it. To what extent, your question was, what about the United States? We really care about it. Well, we did when I was in government, and I have no doubt that President Obama continues to care about it. And I know Secretary Kerry has worked personally hard on it and continues to care about it.
I just add a footnote. If you look at the region, it is the most volatile region in the world today. It is the region that is running the highest risk of general conflict. And it is very important that Turkey and Israel have common ground in that region. It is not possible to imagine that region will be stable until Turkey and Israel, or Israel and Turkey, depending on what point of view you want to take, find common ground to cooperate. These two countries have a lot of potential to make a great deal of difference. As Frank says, that's why the U.S. cares, and we can only hope and work with both these parties to the extent that they want us to do so, to make that day as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question? In the back with the glasses, sir?
Thank you. Thanks a lot for this great presentation by Mr. Ambassador for Ataturk and Mr. Ricciardone on this bilateral relations. I had two quick questions on the current issues, if you allow me, Mr. Ambassador, to Mr. Ricciardone. The first of all, the detente attempt with Iran. How is it affecting the relationship between U.S. and Turkey on the Iran rapprochement with Iran? In terms of its effects on Syria policy. And secondly, you mentioned about the Homeland Security Attaché in Turkey. Actually, you first introduced this attaché to Turkey on October 2012. And before the trip of Secretary Napolitano, you gave 4 suggestions to Secretary before her trip. And one of them was to introduce this attaché. But the other one, in that document, you mentioned about the radical groups arising in the region. It was your concern in 2012, and recently you gave the conference call at the Atlantic Council, and you showed how this issue is poisoning the bilateral relations. What was the consequences of these radical groups emerging in Syria, and the relationship between these groups and Turkey was affected the bilateral relations?
Thank you very much. We have a volunteer.
I'll respond to one, which is the Iran issue, and really just imagine the time when the United States initiated its rapprochement with China and had a very strong ally in the Pacific, Japan. And so the role for the United States was not to try to choose between two countries, but to try to regulate its relationship to an entire region. We have been separated from genuine communication with Iran since 1979. There are people in this room who weren't born in 1979, I hope. And so that's a long time. And it should not be a calculus that somehow what the United States is trying to do to bring Iran into the global community, what we are trying to do to establish better communications with Iran, another country with a lot of very intelligent, hardworking people, as a threat to Turkey. So I hope that in the discussion we can all read the newspapers, we can all see the byplay, who likes who's going to whose capital, and so on and so forth. But from a strategic standpoint, the United States is a global power. It needs to eliminate from the ranks of people who could destabilize the world in a significant